Hello, I want to welcome you to our YouTube channel, Escaping the Revolving Door. I'm John LeMaster. You're viewing the 8th video session now of a 12-session course entitled Escaping the Revolving Door of Prison. Be sure to view video sessions 1 through 7 to get a better understanding of the full course content, and make sure you hit the subscribe button below so that YouTube will notify you when class number 9 will be available for viewing. In our last session, class number 7, titled 10-Step Interview Prep and Effective Resume Writing, we covered the second part of the 4th of the 7 major contributors inmates told us that caused them to reoffend after being released from prison. They told us that when they were released and looking for a job, that they just couldn't find a position that paid an adequate salary for them to pay their obligations, because they either lacked the suitable skills required or they didn't know how to secure the suitable employment with the skills they possessed. In that class, we covered a detailed 10-step interview preparation plan covering how to get ready for that dreaded job interview that you'll have to go through in order to secure that good-paying job you need. Then we developed a good understanding of how to properly prepare and format a resume by describing the various sections of it and what should be included in each section, and in order to impress the person that's reviewing your resume with your qualifications and accomplishments, to show them you're not only a qualified applicant, but also the best person for their open position. In this session, class number 8, entitled Improving Self-Control, part number 1, we will be looking at the 5th of the major contributors to reoffending that the inmates gave us as reasons for reoffending. They said that when they were released from prison, they felt that they just lacked adequate levels of self-control that ended up causing them to have a lot of difficulty controlling their emotions. To them, they felt it be the source of them not being able to resist temptations or restrain their angry outburst and acting in an unhealthy or destructive manner to stressful situations they faced without considering the consequences of their actions. In this class, we want to first examine and describe what self-control is, and then discover what the benefits of having adequate levels of self-control are. To help us in this study, I want us to consider 4 areas that have a strong effect on how we go about developing adequate levels of self-control. First, we want to develop an understanding of just how our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and our behavior are related. We'll probe in this first point what is needed to go about affecting a change in our behavior that'll be more successful than just saying to ourselves, I'm just going to do better the next time. And by understanding the interaction of these 3 mind and body responses. And then secondly, we're going to investigate 6 ways or 6 methods that you can use to develop and strengthen self-control. We're going to show you how to accomplish this by challenging your negative feelings and emotions and start the process of learning how to control your thoughts and beginning to use positive, affirming words on yourself and others. When we do this, we're pronouncing a blessing. Not only ourselves, but others as well. Rather than using those old defeatist, pessimistic, gloomy, gloom-ridden words that end up declaring a curse on ourselves and others. I think we all agree that we'd prefer a blessing to a curse any day. In our third point, I want to ask, have you ever wondered why you do the things you do? Well, we're going to try to answer that by understanding that everything any of us ever does is an attempt to meet a core human need. Core human needs can be defined as something that's required or wanted by a person to bring about success and happiness and a sense of well-being. We'll go about this by looking at what some of the core human needs are, and then what prompts and stimulates us to do the things we do. And then lastly, we're going to discuss the 10 common thinking errors that all of us has to deal with from time to time, and learn how to overcome these thinking errors. That'll help us not only help us feel better about ourselves and begin to change some of our negative behavior, but that's the cause. These are caused by our wrong thinking. By the way, psychologists tell us that the number one cause of depression in prison is these 10 thinking errors. So it's important for anyone, especially inmates, if you're in prison now, to overcome these thinking errors. So what is self-control, and why is it so useful? Well, self-control can be defined as an ability to exercise restraint of one's emotions, thoughts, and behavior, even though facing temptations and impulses. Impulses are those strong urges we have to act in order to achieve specific goals or rewards later on. In psychology, self-control is sometimes referred to as self-regulation. It's the ability to set and attain goals and refrain from those destructive behaviors. Self-control is vital for overcoming obsessions. Obsessions are basically unwanted thoughts, images, or urges that, they preoccupy a person's mind, or they take up their thoughts so that they neglect other matters and ends up causing them distressing feelings and a lot of anxiety. Self-control puts you in control of your life, in control of your behavior and your reactions. It improves your relationships. It helps you to develop patience and tolerance, and it's one of the most important tools for self-improvement and for achieving success and happiness in life. So why do we all need self-control? Well, self-control keeps in check those self-destructive and addictive behaviors we are subject to that enable us to control our moods and reject those old negative feelings and thoughts all of us have at times. It also helps us to strengthen our self-esteem, confidence, and that inner strength. Let's look at what high levels of self-control do for us. People with high levels of self-control exhibit less anxiety, less anger, show fewer impulse control problems, such as binge eating or alcohol or drug abuse, and are far better at resisting temptations. They also report that when they do something wrong, they feel a healthy sense of guilt that causes them to try to make things right and not repeat that action, rather than feeling a sense of shame, which causes self-condemnation that results in that I'm a failure mentality that chains them to the past mistakes as if they can never change. Why don't we all possess healthy levels of self-control? And why do some people seemingly have an overabundance of it while others lack adequate levels to be able to control themselves? Well, psychologists tell us that self-control is developed in our formative years as we're growing up as a child. If our parents, for whatever reason, did not properly nurture us by taking care of us, cherishing and loving and disciplining and training us, in those early years, low self-control is the natural result. When parents are consistent with supervision and discipline, and couple that with affection, the results in the children are a healthy and adequate level of self-control. Parents who lack the time or energy to devote to supervision or have low levels of self-control themselves are contributing to the low levels of self-control in their children without even realizing it. So what are the characteristics of those who demonstrate low levels of self-control? And how do these individuals act? Well, let's look at that. Individuals with low self-control are characterized as impulsive. So they have strong urges or desires to act. They tend to be insensitive. They lack empathy. Empathy is that ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. They're also daring, so they like to take risks and are short-sighted. These keep the individual from evaluating the consequences of their acts. Two gentlemen by the name of Gottfriedson and Hershey further stated that low self-control individuals have a here and now orientation. They lack determination and the persistence to complete tasks undertaken and are self-centered and indifferent. And then finally, individuals with low self-control can be characterized as having a low frustration tolerance. And they tend to respond to conflict physically rather than verbally. Because of these characteristics, individuals with low self-control may not only be involved in acts of crime, but they may be involved also in other risky behaviors like reckless driving and smoking or drinking to excess or be addicted to drugs. To make sweeping improvements in our lives, self-control is just an absolutely essential factor that has to be addressed. There's a tendency in all of us to make choices that place more of an emphasis on immediate gratifications or rewards rather than placing more emphasis on the longer-term goals that'll bring rewards. The good news for all of us is that self-control can be increased with practice and God's help, regardless of our upbringing. Self-control has been defined in many ways, but however we define it, self-control is all about being able to manage yourself. Can you control your feelings and emotions? Can you inhibit or restrain your impulses? What about delaying pleasure and planning for your future? All of these require a healthy dose of self-control. But how do we go about controlling ourselves or controlling our behavior? Well, let's first look at how our thoughts end up controlling our emotions that affect our behavior. In psychology, this interaction between our thoughts, emotions, and behavior is referred to as the cognitive triangle or cognitive behavioral therapy. Sounds like I'm a psychologist. No, I'm reading the facts. Here's a PowerPoint chart showing this interaction. Essentially, CBT holds the view that the way we think about situations affects the way we feel and then how we behave. Simply stated, CBT says what you think about determines your feelings and emotions, and then these emotions influence or cause our behavior. Our feelings and our emotions command us to action. The stronger the feeling, the stronger that command to action is. So if you want to change your actions or behavior, you have to take charge of and change your pattern of thinking. You know, the idea behind sending a person to prison for committing offense is that punishing them by taking them away from their family and friends, their job, the freedom of being outside prison walls, and subjecting them to the conditions in a prison for an extended period of time will cause them to change their negative behavior so that they don't reoffend when they get out of prison. But you know, we brought this out in this course before. The statistics tell us that punishment alone does not work very well, because 75 to 82% of those in prison today will return to prison for another sentence within 36 months due to the fact that within just a few months, inmates forget what prison life was like. And they begin to get involved with those old antisocial friends again and begin to do the same things that got them sentenced to prison in the first place. So much more is needed than just punishment alone to help inmates be truly rehabilitated. So what does work? Well, I'm going to tell you one thing. This course we're teaching works because it challenges someone to change their pattern of thinking, which affects their feelings and emotions and results in a positive behavioral change, and that equips inmates with the right tools to be successful when they're released. Now let's look at some situations and see how this idea of our thoughts determining our feelings, and when we act on those feelings, they cause our behavior. Let's say you and a friend decide to meet somewhere at 6 o'clock p.m. You arrive on time, but your friend doesn't. At 6:15, you begin to think, I sure hope he's all right and nothing's happened to him. The emotions you first feel are worry and anxiety. It might cause you to try to call him. That's your action. But no one answers the phone. At 6:30, you begin to think, this guy's always late. The emotion you feel then is anger or frustration. You begin to think of ways that you're going to get back at him for disrespecting you. At 7 o'clock, you realize he's not coming. And you begin to think, I guess he doesn't like me and he doesn't really want to be my friend. At that, you feel sad or depressed. But that soon turns to anger again, and you decide to tell him off the next time you see him, maybe even punch him for doing the way he did. Of course, a more positive way to handle this would be to counter your negative thoughts by thinking in a more healthy way. He's never done this before. Perhaps the battery in his phone went dead, and he may have gotten into an accident or a traffic jam or simply forgot about the meeting. Because of these positive thoughts, you decide to give him the benefit of the doubt and just ask what happened the next time you see him. This example illustrates how certain thoughts, feelings, and actions can trap you into a negative cycle and even create situations that make you feel worse about yourself. The aim of CBT is to identify and challenge your negative thinking patterns and behavior that may be causing you difficulties. In turn, this can change the way you feel about situations and enable you to change your behavior in the future. Let's see how this thoughts determine feelings, determine behavior plays out in the life of someone from the Bible, the life of King David. When David sinned with Bathsheba, everyone knows this, as it recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 11. He acted on an impulse and an emotion and feeling of lust. The Bible tells us that David stayed home in Jerusalem while he sent his men on to a battlefront. The key statement in Scripture was that David rested all day long in bed and then got up at evening. He was so bored, to say the least. He began to think and long for some excitement. This idle time contributed to his discontent, his thought process, his emotions, and his behavior. Then he began thinking what would be exciting. Then he thought, I'm the king. I can do as I please. He saw Bathsheba at a distance on the roof of her house taking a bath. Viewing her from the roof of the palace, but he had entertained the thought even before he saw her. Then he acted on that emotion caused by his thoughts, but it cost him, didn't it? Temptation is unavoidable, but when it comes, the way we respond will be determined by our thinking patterns over some period before that temptation shows up at our door. Joyce Meyer, if you know her, calls the mind a battlefield. She wrote a great book called The Battlefield of the Mind. And, I believe it'd be a great investment for you to take the time to read that book. Satan wants to control our thinking because, he needs a yielded body to his work in our lives. He knows that our thoughts are the forerunners of our action. What the mind thinks, the man or woman will ultimately do. Let me say that again. What the mind of man or woman think is it ultimately what they end up doing. What we think on is what we become, or what we think about determines our behavior. Now let's look at 6 ways or methods we can use to develop and strengthen self-control. I think I present a pretty good case that we all need self-control. So how do we develop self-control? How do we strengthen that? Well, first you need to identify in what areas of your life you need to gain more self-control. Hey, this is pretty neat. You can work backwards on thoughts, emotions, and behavior, that progression, by looking at the behavior that you want to change. What behavior do you find unable to control? Is it alcohol or drugs or eating or gambling or temper or gossip or lust, greed, laziness, obsessive behavior, or even resisting temptations? Then try to identify the emotion that caused that behavior. Was it anger? Are you angry? Was it anger, dissatisfaction, unhappiness, resentment? Maybe it was pleasure-seeking or even fear. What thoughts brought on those emotions? Then determine to change those thoughts to minimize or eliminate those emotions and the resulting behavior. Number 2, challenge those negative feelings and emotions. Just because we feel something doesn't make it right. Our feelings and emotions cannot be our guide in life because our feelings and emotions are not reliable. Many times our feelings say, I want a second helping. I want a drink. You know something? I think I'll take another drink. I need a double. I want to get high. I want to have an affair. My needs have to be met or I'm going to be absolutely miserable. So we need to challenge our feelings and emotions by taking note of what led to that feeling or emotion in the first place, and then realizing that acting on that feeling or emotion may lead us into a lot of trouble that will result in a lot of regret later on. Then replace those thoughts with positive, constructive, optimistic, and productive thoughts that'll end up bringing great rewards. Number 3, depend on God's power to resist and avoid, to avoid temptation. This is the most important step to lasting self-control. We need God's help in our life. If we're going to resist temptation and overcome and master our feelings and desires and passions. Paul says in Galatians 5:16, so I say live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. When we're living by the Spirit, we aren't so concerned with what the world thinks of us, but what God desires in our lives. Galatians 5:22 and 23 say the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Read this. Look that up and read it. Goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are 9 attributes that the Holy Spirit possesses and uses to influence a person who is living in accord with the Holy Spirit. With God as a master of our lives, we can learn to master our emotions. For the grace of God teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions. and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives. That's taken out of Titus in the New Testament, chapter 2, verse 12. We don't have to give in. We can resist and we can say no. We don't have to depend on our own strength even, because God is with us to assist us. Then number 4, begin to take control of your thoughts. Every word that comes out of your mouth comes from a thought, whether it's conscious or unconscious. If we think good thoughts, what's going to happen? Our words will be good. So right living and self-control begins with right thinking. Check up on yourself. What do you think about a lot? Hooking and crooking, how to steal and not get caught, the feeling you had when you got high on drugs. What other negative thoughts do you have? Remember this, our life moves in the direction of our most dominant thought. Isn't that interesting? So if you want to change your behavior, you have to start by changing your thoughts. Proverbs 23, verse 7 says, as a person thinks in his heart, so is he. The spiritual battle we all face begins inside our thought world. When we think right thoughts, we have right feelings, and we end up doing right things. You can't expect to be kind and gentle and loving and patient or be a good citizen without thinking of the right kinds of thoughts. The key to triumph in spiritual life is learning how to take control of our thoughts and align our thoughts with God's Word. 2 Corinthians 10:5 tells us to cast down or demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. The idea of casting it down is taking control of that kind of thought. Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, had a good series of lines here that I really like. She says, watch your thoughts. They become words. Watch your words. They become actions. Watch your actions because they become habits. And then watch your habits because they end up becoming your character. And watch your character traits because they end up controlling your destiny. Number 5, start using positive, affirming words. There are many ways that words can be used against us. A childhood saying says, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That little saying sounds so good, but unfortunately it is far from true. Verbal insults, verbal abuse, the power of words to affect your emotions and actions are very well demonstrated in science and other places. Others' words can be used against us to manipulate us. Words contrive to change our thinking, our beliefs, our actions. They virtually force us to agree with the manipulator's point of view. Give them what they want, do what they ask, and whether they buy what they're selling. After your release, notice how you're being constantly bombarded with advertising on radio, TV, even billboards while you're driving down the street. These billboards always picture a handsome man and an attractive, smiling woman saying, winners come to Horseshoe Casino. You don't want to be a winner, don't you? But they don't tell you about the man who bet so much that he lost his house or he committed suicide because he lost everything. Their words are so reasonable, so logical, so believable that one's response is just an automatic response. Why are words so powerful? Because words are hooks. Their enormous power lies in what the words mean to the person who hears them. They trigger concepts and ideas and memories. thoughts and feelings from one's subconscious mind even into corresponding emotional responses toward the subject at hand. Think about how Adolf Hitler was able to manipulate an entire nation through his powerful, inflaming words. There's basically just two ways that our words can be used. They either can be used for good to declare a blessing, or used for evil by declaring a curse on something or someone. Strangely enough, we can use our own voice to declare a blessing or a curse not only on someone else, but we can do it for ourselves. Let me give you some examples. I'll never change, John. Nothing ever works out for me. I know when I get out of prison, I'll start doing the very same things that got me in here. I won't be able to find a job to support me and my family. When you say things like that, what are you doing? You're declaring a curse on yourself. I don't think we understand the power of words determine our future. Our words set in motion spiritual principles that absolutely going to come to pass. And you will never rise above the confessions you make about yourself. We can change things in our lives by simply changing our words, the words that we believe. What comes out of your mouth about yourself is what you really believe down deep inside. You're the sum total of the words that have been spoken over you, or your very own words. You are where you are today as a result of your words or the words of others. Basically, your life is just simply caught up with your words. Many of you have had words of friends or parents or teachers or even your enemies that have a profound effect on you. You'll never amount to anything. You're just no good. You can't remember anything, or you can't learn the simplest thing. You are a worthless piece of junk. Those words can affect you, but you know something? You don't have to accept them. You can actually stop the effects of abusive, cutting words by showing that you do not accept them. I call it cutting off the remark. When someone makes a remark about you to tear you down, just show your disagreement and that you do not accept their comment by running your hand through your hair. In my case, not much hair. Or just rubbing your head as a sign to them and to yourself that you're rejecting those words. It's your silent way to show yourself they are wrong about you. And you refuse to go along with their negative assessment of you. Or you can just outright say, you have no idea who I am and what you're saying. Number 6, practice self-control in little things every day. Let me give you an example. There's a story told about a lady in a grocery store with her young child who was crying and having a fit for different things that she saw in the grocery store. First, she saw Fruit Loop cereal. Now, Natalie, you know there's just a few more aisles to go until we check out and go home. Next aisle, what'd you see? Ice cream. Now, Natalie, just a few more aisles until we get home and eat. Then at the checkout counter, there was candy. Again, the little girl this little child had a fit. Mother said calmly, now, Natalie, just a little while longer until we get home. The lady standing behind the checkout counter said, you are such a wonderful mother to teach your little girl, Natalie, to wait until she gets home so she can get these things. Oh, she said, no, I'm Natalie. My little girl's name is Emily. So Natalie what was she doing? She was talking to herself to keep herself from losing her temper and maintain her self-control. Several times a day, especially when you need to display some self-control, repeat for a minute or two several of the following statements here. I'm fully in control of myself. I have the power to choose my thoughts and my emotions. Self-control is bringing me inner strength and leading me to success. And I am in control of my reactions. I am in charge of my behavior. I am gaining control of my emotions. God's desire for me is for me to have self-control. And day by day, my ability to control my feelings and thoughts is increasing. Just say those things over. They'll help you remember that you are gaining self-control. Now let's get into why we do the things we do. Well, to answer that question, we're going to have to delve a little bit down into the field of psychology. Everything any of us ever does is an attempt to meet a core human need. Core human needs can be defined as something that's required or wanted by a person to bring about success and happiness and a sense of well-being. In an article in Psychology Today magazine, you may know about this magazine, the author states that everyone is motivated action by one or more human needs. When we're not aware of what these needs are that we're trying to fulfill, we tend to conduct ourselves based on our feelings, our habits, our thoughts, and our impulses. And then these feelings, habits, thoughts, and impulses help us to deny responsibility for our choices. Our feelings should be sources of information to show us the effects of this guy up here, this thinking, and what human needs we're trying to fulfill, while the habits and impulses that we have motivate us to action, but they lack any choice on our part. The most widely known model of core human needs is the one proposed by a psychologist by the name of Maslow, called the theory of human motivation and referred to as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. To help answer the question why we do the things we do, let's now go into a basic review of Maslow's theory to help us understand why. Maslow proposed that human beings have a certain number of core human needs, and that these needs motivate people to achieve them. And that some needs take priority over other needs. Only when needs in the lower stage are satisfied can one focus on the needs in the next higher stage. Our most basic need is what? For physical survival. And this will be the first thing that motivates our behavior. Once that level is fulfilled, the next level up is what motivates us, and so on. And also the motivation to fulfill such needs will become stronger the longer the duration they're denied. For example, the longer a person goes without food, the hungrier they will become. When a need has been more or less satisfied, the urge to fulfill that need subsides, and our activities become habitually directed toward meeting the next set of goals that we have yet to satisfy. This process continues through 5 levels that Maslow identified. To make this just a little bit easier to see and follow here, let's look at this graphic showing Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid that I've put together on a PowerPoint slide that describes each of the 5 levels of needs Maslow identified. And I'll go through these fairly quickly. I just want to touch on them. Physiological needs are the physical requirements for human survival. If these requirements aren't met, the human body can't function and will ultimately fail. So physiology needs are thought to be the most important, and they should be met first. This is the first and basic need on the hierarchy of needs. Without them, the other needs can't be achieved. They include, and as you see on the graphic, Needs like food and water and shelter and warmth, sleep, clothing, breathing, and the like. The next level up are safety and security needs. Once a person's physiological needs are satisfied, a person's safety and security needs are the next to dominate their behavior. These needs manifest themselves in ways such as preference for financial security, savings account, insurance policies, longing for a stable job, welfare and health care, and social stability, feeling or having some control over things, know what's coming next, and a sense of security in their lives. And then the next level to be achieved is social needs. According to Maslow, humans need to feel a sense of belonging and acceptance among social groups, large or small. For example, some large social groups may include clubs or co-workers or religious groups, professional organizations, sport teams, even gangs. That's why the gangs are sometimes prevalent in prisons and online communities. Some examples of small social connections include family members, intimate partners, mentors, colleagues. Humans need to love other people and to be loved, both sexually and non-sexually by others. Many people become susceptible to loneliness and social anxiety and clinical depression in the absence of this love or belonging. Social needs also include positive family interaction. The next level Maslow identified are esteem needs. Esteem needs are status needs and show us a concern with getting recognition, status, importance, and respect. You know how important respect is. All humans have a need to feel respected. This includes the need to have self-esteem and self-respect. Esteem presents the human desire to be accepted and valued by other people. People often engage in a profession or a hobby or to gain recognition or achievement. These activities give the person a sense of contribution or a sense of value. So then the final level of the pyramid is growth needs. He identified this as the highest level of the hierarchy of needs. Here people are conscious and concerned about their personal growth and their development. Growth needs don't stem from a lack of something, but rather from a desire to grow as a person, become all they can become through the grace of God and conscious and determined effort. They want to be fulfilled and make a contribution in life. They seek to be creative. This level of need refers to what a person's full potential is and realization of that potential. Maslow described this level as a desire to accomplish everything that one can in their life to become the most they can possibly become. For example, one individual may have a desire to become an ideal parent. For others, it may be expressed in being a painter or doing photography or even inventions. In later years, Abraham Maslow explored the further dimension of these needs and calling them a higher goal outside that, to be a selfless concern for other people and seeking God in their lives. Now let's get into the subject of common thinking errors that I mentioned earlier and what we can do about those thinking errors. As I mentioned earlier, it's critical that we overcome and defeat these thinking errors in our lives to help us feel better about ourselves and enhance our self-control, overcome depression, and begin to change some of our negative behavior. As we go about our daily routines, our thoughts greatly influence the way we feel and the way we behave. When you're striving to reach your personal or professional goals, the key to success often starts with recognizing and replacing these 10 common thinking errors. You know, we're all prone to experience thinking errors at times. The most common thinking error can be divided into 10 categories that I've adapted from David Byrne's book entitled Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy. Number one, he says, all or nothing thinking. That's the first thinking error. When you're thinking this way, you see everything in terms of being either good or bad, with nothing in between. For example, you're either great or you're a loser. If you don't look like a model, you must be ugly. If you do something wrong, then you are completely rotten to the core. With this thinking error, anything less than perfect is a total failure. For example, if your performance falls short of absolute perfection, you see yourself as a total failure. Few aspects of human behavior are that absolute. There is nothing 100% good except God Himself. And no one is all bad or all good. We all have differing shades. It's important to avoid thinking about terms of extremes. Just because something isn't completely perfect doesn't mean that it's a total disaster. So what can we do to beat this thinking error? Here's some things you can ask yourself. Am I taking an extreme view of the situation? Are things really so bad, or am I just looking for absolute perfection? And number three, how can I think about this differently? The second thinking error is overgeneralizing. Overgeneralizing is a lot like exaggeration. When you overgeneralize, you exaggerate the frequency of negative things in your life, like mistakes, disapproval, and failures. Typically, you might think of yourself as always making mistakes, or everyone thinks I'm stupid, or nothing ever good ever happens to me. Well, what can you do to beat that thinking error? Well, you can ask yourself this. Am I making oversimplified statements about myself? What are the facts? What is my understanding of what happened? And just because one event happened does not mean I am always wrong or always mistaken. The third thinking error is what's called mental filter. We all have this tendency to remember all the negative things. Boy, I do. I remember everything I did wrong wherever. We remember those negative things, but we forget the positive things. But when you continually shoot down the positive experiences for various reasons, you're allowing negative beliefs to dominate your everyday experience. The good stuff doesn't count because the rest of your life is miserable. That doesn't count because my life sucks. To beat this thinking error, what can you do? Ask yourself, am I looking at the negatives while ignoring the positives? Is there a more balanced way to look at this situation? Also, make a list of personal strengths and accomplishments, listing both your negative and your positive character attributes and behaviors to keep you from always looking at the negative side or negative opinion of yourself. And then the fourth thinking error is disqualifying the positive. This kind of thinking error, you focus on certain, usually negative or upsetting aspects of something while ignoring or dismissing all the positive aspects. In other words, you notice your failures, you never see your successes. Another common thinking error is to make unfair comparisons between certain individuals and yourself. When you do this, you're comparing yourself to someone who maybe has a specific advantage in some area. Making unfair comparisons can make you feel very inadequate. Making unfair comparisons about us and other people can ruin our motivation. How do we beat this thinking error? Well, here's some questions you can ask. Am I disregarding the good that's happened to me? Am I comparing myself with people who have an advantage that I don't have? The fifth thinking error is jumping to conclusions. I love this one. 2 + 2 = 5. It's a good one to say, jumping. Assuming something negative when there is actually no evidence to support it. Two specific subtypes of this are mind reading. We often think we know what other people are thinking. We assume that others are focused on our faults and our weaknesses. This is most of the time wrong. Remember, you are your worst critic. To beat this thinking error, don't assume you know what others are thinking. Ask yourself, what's the evidence? How do I know what other people are thinking? Just because I assume something, does that mean I'm right? And the other part is fortune telling. With this thinking error, you anticipate that things are going to turn out badly for you. You feel convinced that your prediction is already an established fact. To beat this thinking error, you have to ask this. How do you know something's going to turn out a certain way? Check out the facts. Then the sixth thinking error is magnification and minimization. It's often called blowing things out of proportion. This is when we imagine that the worst possible thing is about to happen and predict that we're just not going to be able to cope with the outcome. We exaggerate the negatives and understate the positives about ourselves while exaggerating the positive characteristics of others and understate their negatives. Isn't that interesting? To beat this thinking error, you have to ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? And what about the best thing that happened? And what's most likely to happen? And then, I love this one. Will this matter in 5 years? I have to ask that myself on that one a lot of times. And then the seventh thinking error is emotional reasoning. Assuming that because we feel a certain way, it has to be true. I feel embarrassed, so I must be an idiot. You spill food on yourself at a restaurant. You feel like a jerk, and so you look around and you see others say, well, they must be thinking the same thing. Making decisions and arguments based on how you feel rather than reality. People who allow them to get caught up in emotional reasoning can become completely blinded to the difference between feelings and facts. Our emotions aren't always based on reality. But we often assume those feelings are rational. If I feel like a loser, I must be a loser. No. It's essential to recognize that emotions, just like our thoughts, aren't always based on the facts. Sometimes you might confuse your thoughts or feelings with reality. You might assume that your perceptions are correct. To beat this thinking error, stick to the facts, not your feelings. Ask yourself, am I confusing my feelings with the facts? Just because I'm feeling this way doesn't mean that my perceptions are correct. Am I thinking this way just because I'm feeling depressed right now? That happens. Then the eighth thinking error, should, must, or ought statements. Should and ought statements focus on what in the world there's not a thing you can do about it. You can't control it. You focus on other people's expectations of you instead of your own needs. Concentrate on what you think should or ought to be rather than the actual situation you're faced with simply stresses you out. To beat this thinking error, ask yourself, what would it feel like if you could or could not? What would happen if you And then the ninth thinking error, labeling and mislabeling. This thinking error is related to overgeneralization. Rather than describing a specific behavior, you assign a label to someone or even or yourself that puts them in absolute negative terms. This is an error where we make a leap from behavior to identity. He called me a name, therefore he's a jerk. When you use labels, you might call yourself or other people names instead of being specific. For example, saying, that was a silly thing to do. You make negative generalizations about yourself. To beat this thinking error, you got to ask, remember who you are in spite of the behaviors. Even though I failed the test, I'm still a worthy person. Even though I've been sentenced to prison, I'm still a valuable person, and God has a plan for my life. Jeremiah 29:11 says that. Remember the challenge. Judge the situation and not the person. And then the 10th and final thinking error, personalization and blame. This thinking error has been called the mother of guilt. Personalization occurs when you hold yourself personally responsible for an event that isn't entirely under your control. For example, my son's doing poorly in school, so I must be a terrible parent. Instead of trying to pinpoint the cause of the problem so that you can really be more of a help to your child. When a woman's husband beat her, she said, if only I was better to him, he wouldn't beat me. That's not true. Personalization leads to guilt and shame and feeling of inadequacy. And on the flip side of personalization is blame. Some people blame other people or their circumstances for their problems. And they overlook ways that they might be contributing to the problem. The reason my marriage is so lousy is because my spouse is totally unreasonable. Instead of investigating their own behavior and beliefs that they might be able to change and help the situation. Some people get very frustrated when they have to do things they don't enjoy. They tell themselves, I just can't stand this. And instead of acknowledging that they're just really not going to enjoy them. To beat this thinking error, ask yourself, why am I accepting the blame? This is beyond my control. The people involved might not be the whole cause of my problem. So could I be contributing to my own problems? This thing that's happened in life is a real hassle. But life is full of frustrations and hassle, so I'm just going to have to deal with it. So what's the effect of challenging thinking errors? Well, the effect of challenge your thinking errors, it can make you feel better. You can minimize depression and encourages you to change some of your behavior. Remember, when you're feeling down, try to examine your thoughts. If they're negative or critical, try challenging them. Once you get in the habit of disputing your negative self-talk, you'll find it easier to handle those difficult situations. And as a result, you'll feel less stressed, more confident, and in control. If this class has been a benefit to you, please subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below, and be sure to tune in to our next session of Escaping the Revolving Door. Session number 9, entitled Improving Self-Control, part number 2, where we will be covering how to understand and control your anger. This is John LeMaster saying, I'll be looking for you in our next session.